Yo, what is up guys, and welcome back to another Mythic Heroes video. Before I hop into the video, I just wanted to let you guys know that we're really close to 300 subs, so if you'd consider subscribing and dropping a like, it'd really help the channel out. With all that said, let's hop straight into it. I'll have timestamps for the different parts of the video in the description below, so feel free to use those to hop into the segment you want. So firstly, why even care about doing well versus the Dust boss anyways? It might not seem like you're going to be missing out on a lot of dust daily by not optimizing your score because it's just a couple of thousand dust, especially if you're not being dust capped, but those small amounts of dust that you're missing out can really add up over to a few levels over time, especially if you've been neglecting your dust trials for a long time. And you really want to increase your levels because your Sinful Abyss circle is primarily going to be dependent off of that. And higher levels in Sinful Abyss means you get more rewards from there as well. So now that we've established that you shouldn't really ignore the Dust boss, let's go into more detail about how exactly this boss works. The Djinni, the name of the Dust boss, is like any of the other Trials of Ascension bosses in the sense that it is a rage meter kind of boss who dies, quote unquote, at 32 chest count, just like any of the other Ascension bosses. And just like the other Ascension bosses, the dust amount that you get caps at 30 chests currently, so anything past that is really just for funsies. Also, the damage threshold needed to hit the dust count or the chest count will grow exponentially, with you needing to deal a total of 18 billion with a B damage to Djinni to quote-unquote kill him. More about the rage meter in a bit, but if this video gets 6.9 likes, I'll do videos for how to maximize your score in those bosses as well. Back to rage meter bosses. These bosses gain additional stats the higher their rage meter counter is, and the more damage you deal, the higher their rage meter counter will increase to. They'll start off with very low stats, and after a certain amount of damage, they'll gain a significant amount of stats. So why exactly is all of this important? It's because depending on how much damage you're able to deal and take on, it'll greatly impact what runes and artifacts you will need. This account is in late game, and I can deal quite a bit of damage, and with enough RNG I can also take on quite a bit of damage as well. Which is I might be using Thunder runes since surviving is something I can RNG, and the boss will gain enough defense for it to make it worth it for me to equip Thunder runes to maximize my damage potential. However, if you're not reaching super high rage counter stacks, it might make more sense for you to run dark runes or fire runes on your DPS instead. And if you find that your supports are consistently dying early on in the fight, no matter how much you RNG, then it might make sense to slap shield or earth runes on many of your heroes as well. Now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go into more specific detail about Djinni, the dust boss of Efreet Den, in more detail. For his first active, the Djinni Magic Circle, he will cast a Magic Circle, and after a while it will explode to deal 300% damage to all of your heroes, and reduces their energy by 300. At higher rage stacks, this might even tend to one-shot a lot of your team as well, so be careful to watch out for it. For his passive ability, called Physical Immunity, the Djinni will reduce all physical damage he takes by 75%, but in return he will take 30% extra magic damage. Fighters and tank class heroes will deal physical damage, while support and mage class heroes will deal magical damage. So while you want a mage to be your main DPS for this boss if possible, it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't also run a select few fighter class heroes on your team as well. More detail on that in a bit. For the Djinni's second active skill, called Djinni's Casting, he will cast a spell on the enemy or on one of your heroes with the highest energy, dealing 200% damage and removing the unit from the fight for 5 seconds. During this removal period, that unit will not be able to deal or take on any damage and won't be able to gain attack or hit energy restoration. Now that we've covered all of the Djinni's skills, let's hop into the team that I used real quick. If you don't have some of these units built, don't worry, I'll cover an alternate sub-in options for some of the units after, so be sure to stick around. But yeah, so here's going to be the replay of my 31 chest run, where I dealt 14.4 billion out of the 18 possible billion damage. I might have been able to kill the boss if my Amaterasu was iconic weapon 600 and if some of my units didn't die out towards the end. Shout out to the homie Whitez on Discord for showing me this team. And yeah, here's the replay. So I know some of you guys might be raising your eyebrows at this team and asking, didn't you just say that the Djinni takes 75% reduced damage from fighters and tanks? Why are you using Archie and Freya then? It's all good. Here's my in-depth breakdown of why I use certain heroes, even if some of those choices may look questionable. So I ran a 2 front 3 back formation, and it kind of matters in this context as I ran an Archie Odin core. Let me know if you guys want a video later on of a more in-depth breakdown of this core, as it's quite an interesting core and I'll cover it more in-depth later. But for now, to summarize it, Odin will essentially just give ravens to the frontline ally with the lowest percentage health. And if both units are in the same percentage, i.e. 100%, then in that case it'll go to the hero in position 1. For this comp, we want Archie to constantly get ravens, as that will enable him to chain his ultimate back to back to back. The boss will also tend to prioritize the hero in position 1 with attacks, so to ensure that Archie gets ravens, we'll place him in position 1. For Archie's divinity, we will be running Colossus, which will raise his attack by 50% of his defense value, Torment, which will increase the damage he deals to enemies with a debuff by 12%, and for the last slot, I ran Prevail, although you can probably replace this divinity skill with Primal Totem, or Culmination with about an equal outcome. For his equipment, I ran Dark Runes to boost his attack, and I also slapped on the Axe artifact. Now you guys might be asking, why are you using Archimedes? Didn't you just say this boss barely takes any physical damage? And you guys are absolutely right. Archimedes is not necessarily in this comp to deal damage, although I do have him on full damage loadout, because you never know if you might need that tiny bit of extra damage to get to the next chest threshold. Archimedes is in this team to primarily debuff the boss by constantly reducing his defense via his piercing rounds passive ability. Every time Archie deals damage, he'll reduce the target's defense by 4% up to 10 times. This goes up to 20 times with his iconic weapon 400 ability, and due to him constantly using his ultimate ability thanks to Odin's ravens, this defense reduction will almost always be active. Well, what about Freya then, you might ask? Freya is also in this team to debuff the boss just like Archie is, and not necessarily there to deal the most damage. She is frontline though, as she has a nice lifesteal, so whenever the boss does target her and she loses a little bit of HP, she should be able to heal it back up to it thanks to her lifesteal, ensuring that Archie will be the one consistently getting the ravens. For her divinities, I ran Corrosion to keep the damage, to keep reducing the boss's defense, and Eternal to increase her damage dealt, as it allows her to ignore 20% of the Djinni's defense whenever she attacks him. For the last slot, I ran Gravity Field, although it did next to nothing in this fight. I meant to swap it out for Embroilment to increase the damage dealt, or Fanaticism in case she gets slow to heal her back up, making it more consistent for Archie to constantly get the ravens. For her equipment, I ran Fire Runes and the Staff Artifact to further increase her damage dealt. Again, to reiterate, Freya is not here to function as a main DPS, but more so as an additional debuffer who can deal a good chunk of extra small damage to boost you to the next chest threshold in case you are close. So how exactly does she debuff the boss, you might be asking? It's all thanks to her Bound Prey active skill. She essentially chains Djinni up in her basement and nullifies his hit energy restoration. During this time, Djinni is cuffed, and anytime any of your units use any of their auto attacks on him, that damage dealt is increased by 50. And they restore 30 energy. If you find that your Freya is not consistently chaining Djinni, you can give her air runes instead of fire, or Yasakani artifact instead of staff. Last but certainly not least, to round out the main debuffing core of this team, we have Odin. Odin will stay in the backline as he does not have any real self-sustain, and we want to ensure that Archie will consistently get his ravens via Odin's Raven Guardians ability. Odin will give ravens to the frontline ally with the lowest percentage HP, will go to position 1 if tied percentage, and the ravens will shield the ally, and more importantly, it'll restore 30 energy every time they attack, and with his iconic weapon abilities, it also boosts this frontline ally's auto attack speed quite a bit. Odin can further debuff Djinni via his Fated Choice active skill, which will remove all of Djinni's dodge, reduces Djinni's crit chance by 15%, and increases Djinni's damage taken by 15% as well. Odin can also help make your team more tanky thanks to his Hazy Mist passive ability. For Odin's divinities, the most important one here for bossing is going to be Extraordinary, which boosts all allies' attack by 15% after 15 seconds of the battle starting. Now you might be wondering, if it's so important, then why did we not equip it on Freya as well, since she also has access to it? The reason for that is that this divinity skill does not stack, so having it on one hero will suffice. And since Odin's DPS potential is basically 0, I would much prefer if he has it so that Freya can take more offensive divinities. And the other divinities on Odin are going to be Corrosion to further reduce Djinni's defense, and Gravity Field because I forgot to change it out. Not that it really matters, to be honest, since Odin doesn't really have that many great divinities left if you only have 6 nodes on him like I do. For his equipment, I ran air runes to increase his Raven Guardian skill spam, and I also ran the shield artifact to prevent him getting one shot later on, since the boss will start dealing quite a bit of damage after reaching 30 chests. If Djinni one-shotting you isn't really that big an issue, then you can slap Yasakani onto him, as it would make more sense to guarantee that Odin will be constantly spamming his skills. Now that we have the core debuffers, let's move on to our supportive queen. But I'll show myself out. But no, for real, Western Queen is insanely helpful for this boss. Her main role is to greatly boost the damage output for your main DPS. Ideally, this is going to be the magical DPS for this boss, via her Blue Bird ability, which gets even more busted OP with her iconic weapon as well as with her ultimate. The Blue Bird will target the ally with the highest combat rating, however, so if it doesn't happen to be your magical DPS, you might have to reset your other heroes' enhancements to make their power low enough to where your magical DPS will get it. With Iconic Weapon 2, she can also further debuff the boss if you want blue nodes on her like I did. For her divinity, I ran Panacea, Prevail, and Tenacious to make her as tanky as possible, but also because I don't really have Excitement unlocked on her yet. Her optimal build would probably be Panacea and Excitement. For her runes and artifacts, I ran Dark Runes to allow for more ultimates per game, as well as to boost her attack even further. For her artifact, I ran Excalibur to increase the damage output of my whole team. If you find her dying quite frequently, you might want to consider a more defensive loadout, like Earth Runes or Water Runes instead. And finally, let's cover our DPS for this boss, Amaterasu. She will be the one outputting the majority of your damage versus Djinni. She can also dish out insane amounts via her Reflect, Auto Attack, and her Ultimate. For her Divinity spread, you will always be running Spotlight, but depending on if she is Iconic Weapon 500 or not, it may vary between either running Wrath or Collective Fervor. If she is Iconic Weapon 500 plus, then she will be reflecting all the damage that Djinni deals to her back at him, so Collective Fervor makes more sense in this case as she takes 0 damage. If she is under Iconic Weapon 500, however, and you see that she is taking quite a lot of damage, then Wrath might make more sense. For her runes and artifacts, it will largely depend on how many rage stacks you are getting to. If you get to high enough rage stacks, then it might be worth considering going Thunder Axe or a Thunder Chakra. But if you're not quite at that point where the boss is not going to have that many rage stacks, then fire or dark runes may make more sense. Experiment yourself to see what works best for you. That just about covers the team that I used. However, I do realize that not everyone may have the same units I've built, especially Amaterasu with her being a UR. So in this part of the video, I'll list out some other alternate options if you do not have some of the same units that I have built. For the DPS slot, if you don't have Amaterasu built up, then you might consider running the same team but slotting in GM, so Ganjin and Moye, or Tamama no Me instead, as they can also deal quite a bit of decent damage, albeit nowhere close to Amaterasu. If you don't have any of those built up either, then you might be able to get away with Prometheus or Zeus. For the support/debuffer slots, if you don't have Archeodin, Freya, or Western Queen built, then some other options can include Dionysus to reduce the enemy's defense and attack speed/accuracy, etc. at Iconic Weapon 300, and reduce even more of Djinni's stats at Iconic Weapon 500. Lu Bu to buff the damage dealt versus Djinni via his Iconic Weapon 200 ability, and then Nua and Iset to just general team buffers. That just about covers everything I could think of for this boss. Let me know down in the comments if I missed anything. If this video gets 6.9 likes, I'll do follow-up guides for the other Trials of Ascension bosses. If you guys made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.